It has been said that to anybody with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's why you have to be careful about experts. It's not that they're bad people. I mean, sometimes they are, of course, but that's not the point. But because they are involved with their own subject so much, that's all they're going to see. They will not see the bigger picture. And when you get a group like SAGE, which is the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, which is a group of scientists who have been appointed to help the Prime Minister make decisions in the case of medical emergencies, you get often a lot of hysterical stuff because these people know the very worst. And actually, in most cases, the very worst doesn't happen. One of the most horrible examples of this was the foot and mouth disease. I've just thought of it now. The foot and mouth epidemic in Britain. It was during Tony Blair's administration. I don't remember what it was, but a lot of valuable livestock and much beloved livestock was destroyed on the advice of government statistics that really actually didn't hold water. There were many people whose lives were devastated by this. And I remember one situation where a woman who had spent her life breeding a particular sort of goat, and she actually brought them into her house to isolate them. And even so, the men in their hazmat suits came in and killed them all. It was just too awful for words. And it was because there was a scientific group that was just going crazy with statistics, and people like Tony Blair, they just love their government agencies and crazy statistics, and they just followed it. It was devastating disaster. And that's why I am suspicious of SAGE. They're all highly educated people. They could probably talk me into a corner in a couple of minutes, but still, I have this feeling deep inside that they might not really know what they're talking about, or rather, they know too much of what they're talking about. And here are the people who are on SAGE. Sir Patrick Vallance, the Chief Scientific Officer. He was the one who said that a vote for Brexit would mean uncertainty for future drug development, which is actually really a load of bunkum. Anything means uncertainty for future drug development. But if you notice, there are hundreds of countries now all chasing the development of some sort of drug for COVID, and they're not in the EU, are they? But they're still coming up with stuff. That really was, if this guy is the person who's giving advice, he is absolutely not to be taken any notice of. There's always going to be uncertainty over any sort of drug development. And the next one, Chris Whitty, he's a doctor and epidemiologist. And then there's Jonathan van-tam, Deputy Chief Medical Officer. Something about him. He spoke, oh dear, I'm going to try and find that because that's very important. Let's have a look. Oh, apples and pears. You see, okay, right, this is really quite important because he is on this board that's telling the government to, lock down more stringently than the government is doing. And yet that's what the committee says. But what the individuals say, not quite the same. You know that one about a definition of a camel? A camel is a horse designed by a committee. And so you get the most awkward nonsense coming out of committees when the individuals themselves are very sensible. Here is Dr. van-tam talking about the rising case numbers. In my last video, I said I was going through a speech by Keir Starmer in which he says the numbers are going up. And I said, well, that's his job to say things like that, but you can't actually rely on those statistics. And here we have Dr. van-tam saying, well, what I said, although more learnedly. He said, although we have case numbers here that look like they're more than they were in March, we had no idea of the scale in March. Look, health officials, presented a lot of introduction. Okay. However, Professor Jonathan van-tam, it's Professor van-tam, sorry, England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, felt compelled to admit those numbers came with a hefty warning. While statistics showing around 15,000 positive cases a day appeared to compare badly with highs of around 5,000 a day back in April and May, in fact, this is an apples and pears comparison, the medic said. Actually, you can compare apples and pears. They're similar type of fruit. So, Professor van-tam, you may be a doctor, an epidemiologist, but you ain't no botanist. By the way, apples, they're called false fruits because the actual fruit of in an apple is the pip. The rest is, what was it called? An expanded rhizome. I'm dragging my botany lessons out from, well, too many years ago. Okay. In the spring, of course, there was no routine testing for suspected COVID-19 cases. Meanwhile, meaning any infections which were detected were the tip of the iceberg. So you see, we have his opinion on how the statistics are calculated. And we actually cannot rely on the statistics. All we can look at really is the death rate for a month and then compare it. And the problem with that is some of the deaths are not COVID related, or they are COVID related, but they're more related to things like suicide or untreated illnesses, which, the COVID epidemic stopped being treated, that sort of thing. So even that's not all that liable. Okay, so here we have van-tam. He is actually an expert in influenza and respiratory viruses. Stephen Powis. That might be Powles, by the way. I don't know how his name's pronounced. Professor Sharon Peacock, National Infections. Well, okay. So these are all very eminent people. Well, until you get to Neil Ferguson, the one who originally suggested the most stringent of lockdowns and the one who, it turns out, had his girlfriend over for a little bit of nookie when she was travelling across London by public transport. And he didn't see anything wrong with that. So, one law for them and one law for him. So these are, although I respect the others because they have given me no reason not to respect them, except for Sir Patrick, who has this EU comment, which I found a little unrespectable, and Neil Ferguson, whom I do not respect even slightly. And then there's this guy here. Well, I'm sorry. They say that the older you get, the younger policemen start looking. But this fella looks about as old as Owen Jones. And that's not a compliment. All right. So, well, what's happened here is that Boris Johnson decided he wasn't going to follow their advice as stringently as they were telling him he should be doing. And good. At last, you can have statistics pouring all over you. It doesn't help. You have to make up your mind. You have to weigh the difference between people's lives who aren't infected by the disease and people's lives who are. I keep saying, I know I'm at risk. I know my husband's at risk. I'm not happy about that. But I also want my grandchildren to have a future. And the way things are going, I'm not happy about that either. And I'd rather they had the future. So here we are with Boris Johnson actually appearing to grow a pair. He also is now talking about a Brexit on the Australian style, which is basically WTO terms. And I'm really happy about that as well. So it looks like he's just got fed up of all the statistics being poured at him. Boris Johnson overruled government scientists who pressed for national lockdown measures, such as stopping all household mixing and closing all pubs. It emerged on Monday night. Oh, that's a few days ago. Papers from the Scientific Advisory Group, etc., etc. Said failure to take such measures could result in a very large epidemic with catastrophic consequences. Yeah, it could. You have to balance things off here, don't you? And look how they're hedging their bets. They're saying it could result in a catastrophic national thing. Well, yeah. But they are people who are paid to look for catastrophes. So you've got to take what they say with a little, savoir-faire, I suppose is the word. And so we're going to have a series of layered alerts. So there, Liverpool, that's the highest, and then there are more restrictions, and then this somewhat less, and then these are, just be careful. I still don't think this rule of 6 business is a good idea, but at least it's better than nothing at all, which is what these scientists were saying. So you see, right, well, that's it. I want to congratulate Boris Johnson on at last sticking to his guns. And I want to, in my last video, when I talked about Keir Starmer, there was something I forgot to mention, which I will now. Keir Starmer took those figures about the potential catastrophic consequences, and he used them in his argument. And yeah, that's his job. So fine. But in my opinion, anyone who is photographed kneeling to anyone but the Queen, or maybe God, is not fit to be a prime minister. And when I saw him doing that BLM knee business, I'll find a photograph of it and I'll put it there. That's not a prime minister. Actually, I remember there's, what was it? It was one of those disaster films, Independence Day, wasn't it? Where they got somebody to stand in for the president, and then the aliens told him to kneel for them, and the stand-in kneeled, and then one of the aliens said, no, the president would never kneel, you're not the right guy. And I'd stick with that. And also I want to mention, just to lighten it up a bit, Nicola Sturgeon, the situation in Scotland, by the way, seems to be quite bad. There've been a couple of deaths from COVID recently. She is dealing with the situation by telling off Marks and Spencer's for selling Scotch beef with the Union flag on it instead of the Scottish flag. It's nice when you have your priorities, unlike Boris Johnson, who seems to have his priorities on the welfare of the British people. Nicola Sturgeon has her priorities on the sort of flag Marks and Spencer's is using to brand their beef. And I think that's a good idea, actually. If I ate beef and I saw that Scottish flag on instead of the Union flag, I'd know what beef not to buy in Marks and Spencer's. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com. And whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.